that is this great, incredible gift of the redwoods, is this ability to help with this connection back to community and to create this space so that you can within yourself also begin to remember the limits, to push the ceiling of what it's possible for you to be.
Hello and welcome to the Herbs with Rosalee podcast, a show exploring how herbs heal as medicine, as food, and through nature connection. I'm your host, Rosalee de la Forêt. I created this YouTube channel to share trusted herbal wisdom so that you can get the best results when relying on herbs for your health. I love offering up practical knowledge to help you dive deeper into the world of medicinal plants and seasonal living. Each episode of the Herbs with Rosalee podcast is shared on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and recipes for each episode can be found at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com or through the link in the video description. Also in the video description, you'll find other helpful resources. For example, to get my best herbal tips, as well as fun bonuses, be sure to sign up for my weekly herbal newsletter. Okay, grab your cup of tea and let's dive in. First up is the Herbs with Rosalee Student Spotlight. Each week we take a moment to celebrate one of our amazing students and their inspiring contributions to our herbal community. This week we're delighted to shine the spotlight on Kyle Putnam from Washington State. She's a valued member of our community and a dedicated student at the Herbs with Rosalee School. While working through Cooling Inflammation and Rooted Medicine Circle, Kyle regularly chimed in with thoughtful posts and helpful reflections in the student forums. She's now diving into our newest course, the Herbal Energetics course, where her curiosity and dedication really shine, whether she's sharing her thoughts, asking great questions, or getting hands-on with herbal experiments. Since joining us in 2021, Kyle has continued to generously share her experiences and wisdom, offering encouragement and support to fellow students. It's always a joy to have her in our community. To honor her contributions, Mountain Rose Herbs is sending Kyle a $50 gift certificate to stock up on their incredible selection of sustainably sourced herbal supplies. Mountain Rose Herbs is my go-to for high-quality organic spices, herbal remedies, and even hard-to-find botanicals. They ship all over the U.S. and have a massive selection of products to fuel your herbal adventures. Thank you so much to Mountain Rose Herbs for supporting our amazing students. And if you'd like to explore Mountain Rose Herbs' offering and support this show, you can find the special link in the show notes. It was an absolute joy to connect with Julie and have her on the podcast. I first met Julie when I was just a baby herbalist, and I'll share that story during our conversation. And I've long held her beautiful herb shop close to my heart. It was such a joy to visit that as well. This conversation is full of pearls of wisdom. I loved hearing about the humble beginnings of her herbal store, such an inspiring journey for anyone dreaming of starting their own herbal path. And then her vivid descriptions of the redwoods just make this episode feel like a travelogue. So whether you've wandered through the redwood forests or you have yet to see them, this conversation offers a magical way to experience their majesty. Even more, so much of what Julie shares is deeply relevant to your own local forests, including an incredibly decadent recipe that you won't want to miss. For those of you who don't already know her, Julie Caldwell lives in the Pacific Northwest coastal mountains of Northern California among the ancient old-growth redwood forests and the wild Pacific coastline. For the past 27 years, she has happily tended her vibrant retail herbal apothecary, Humboldt Herbals, where many powerful relationships between people and plants have been cultivated. Julie is a long-serving member of the Visioning Council for the Organization of Nature Evolutionaries, an educational nonprofit dedicated to co-creative partnership with nature, and is deeply committed to amplifying communication with nature consciousness and our brilliantly beautiful wild earth. Hello, Julie. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Rosalee. I'm so very excited to spend time with you today.
Well, gosh, I've been thinking about it, and I've been looking forward to this today, all day long. And this has been several months in the making, really. So there's been months of anticipation. But the reality is I've actually been wanting you on the show for years. So this feels like a really big moment. It's yay, it's happening.
Oh, that's super exciting. I feel the same. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to hear about your herbal journey. I'm so excited to talk about Humboldt Herbals. I'm excited to talk about your work with one, and I'm so glad that you chose redwoods as your plant. That's definitely what I associate with you. So that's nice. But let's start, like, I just feel like I want to like dive into everything at once. But let's start, please, with your herbal journey and just what's brought you along your path and brought you here with us today.
Yeah, so it's definitely been a meandering journey, as a young person, if you told me that, plants were gonna be my vocation, yeah, that would have just been the most bizarre thought
Hmm.
to me then, but then, how all the bits and pieces click together in retrospect. It's like, okay, I see why and how and where, but my my dad was a pharmacist. That's kind of where it starts, and I spent summers working in his drugstore, so to now have an herbal shop, but there's like the grains of that way back then because I would work the counter and watch him help the people and recommend medicines. He would let me, count out the tablets, and sometimes he would let me compound things, which was
Wow.
like super exciting, because I was on it. I was very careful. It wasn't without oversight, but so there was that piece. And we lived on, a farm. I grew up in South Alabama. So we had acres of plants, farm plants, but I was out in gardens a lot as a kiddo. And my grandmother was like famous for her flower gardens, also her vegetables and her foods and all that. But she was the first person I ever met who like her plants had names like Carol and Doug and and they had these personalities to her, and she would talk to them, fiddle with them, and ask them what they wanted. And so there was this like really interesting, now I know, plant communication story happening. But that was just my grandmother, and I loved being with her out, playing with that. And then college things, I found the interest grew. Still a total sidebar. My degrees, I have like, undergrad degree in biology and psychology. And then I've got a master's in literature. I specialized in contemporary American poetry. So none of these things, right, with plants, but plants were always this side thing, but there was, way before internet, any of that stuff. So I found, in a used bookstore I used to go to all the time, I found Jeannie Rose's Herbs and Things. So that was my very first herb book. And then Back to Eden, that old chestnut. So
Yeah.
I wrote those books, and I would just like marvel at them. It was like such an exciting idea that, that there was all this wild medicine available that you could like do things with, so I was just hungry for it on that level, but no access to it. And so that kind of just churned and churned always. It was this, anytime I came across anything herbal, I was like so interested in reading, learning about it. One of the pivotal things back in grad school, Jim Duke, the famous Jim Dukes from Birmingham, Alabama, which is where I went to college. And one of my biology professors, he was coming to do a lecture, and she gave us extra credit if we went to go hear this lecture with Jim Duke, and he was doing his ethnobotanical database stuff and whatever. But he did talk about medicinal plants. He talked about medicinal plants in cooking and medicinal plants in these really approachable ways. And he said this thing that I can't tell you how much it's informed where my whole herbal world came to. And it just stuck so vividly in that moment. But someone asked a question about UAB is a medical school, kind of first and foremost. So there's all these, med school people in this lecture and stuff too. And how do you know what a plant's going to do? Because they're coming from farms. How do you know this? And so instead of going off on a whole, spiel about constituents and things and stuff, he said that a plant, he used yellow dock as his specific example, but he said, yellow dock is going to do 100 different things for 100 different people. This is because we are co-evolved with the plants. And he said, when you take a plant medicine into your body, it's like going to a buffet. And everybody's, some people might, it's like, oh, this is my favorite thing. I'm totally going to like pile my plate with this. And I don't really like that so much, but I'm definitely going to have some of this. And the way each individual body works with that array on the buffet table is going to be different. It's never going to be exactly the same from person to person. And so, I just thought, well, that's fascinating. That's interesting. But as a retail herbalist, that's made so much sense to me, and why, retail herbalism is kind of a whole different animal in the herbal world. We're not exactly clinical herbalist, ish, but it's a different thing when you're practicing for your community in a retail setting.
Mm.
But yeah, so I, curtain falls, time passes, I guess, wound up in San Francisco for a bit doing tech writing, total soulless work. And from San Francisco found the Redwoods. The Redwoods pulled me up here where I am now to Humboldt County. I came and visited for a weekend, and then I lived here 3 weeks later. And
Wow.
it was home immediately. I knew that the first time I was in a Redwood, and I'm driving in my car up through here, but you go on this, little stretch called Avenue of the Giants. That's just this, road of these enormous old growth redwoods on either side. And I had to just like stop the car and get out and just like weep, it was just this, I was just so overcome with emotion in this place. And, it was kind of immediately when I got here that they put me to work, and I still wouldn't have said at all I was an herbalist. But what happened is I met the plant people when I came here, and there was a little herb store, but it was kind of, a little awkward to like park and get all these things. And we, in this little plant group, we started having potlucks to just talk about plants like plant people do, and geeking out on plants and stuff. And it was like, maybe you guys could start kind of like a buying co-op is what it was. I was like, what if because we had all these certain plants besides the ones that we wanted to use. So what if I start a buying co-op and we'll get the herbs and I'll get them and then we'll just divvy them up. And that's really how Humboldt Herbals started, was through that. And then, keep meeting the plant people. They're making these amazing products that nobody knew they were making because, again, no internet, no any way to kind of get this stuff out. And so then it was like, what if I was totally inspired by the J. Peterman catalog? I'm like, what if I make like a catalog and we'll put everybody's products in there? This is just like this crazy wild idea. And, and then we'll, I'll have some teas and, we'll do the herbs and stuff too. And there's this friend who was an artist. She hand drew like everybody's little products and stuff. And so I literally cut and pasted, took it to a printer, got these little catalogs made. I would leave them in laundromats and grocery stores, and all this stuff. But then lo and behold, the community starts ordering things, they could call and leave a message, or they could mail in their little, used to rip out an order form from the catalog, fill it out, mail it in. All right, so this is where we're at. And so then that started happening. And then that kind of grew. It was like, maybe this could be a shop. So I got this really tiny little space that was like awkward. People had to walk up 2 flights of stairs to get to it. I had cardboard boxes and I put little cloths over the boxes and would set everybody's little products out, and stuff and the little herbs. But the people came. And so now that's 27 years ago. And I grew out of that tiny, tiny space and moved into a gorgeous corner space. It's continued to grow. I'm now generations into the community of being able to be of service. And, it's just, it happened that way. And I learned on my feet. I did have access. Got to give a little shout out to Jane Bothwell, who lives here in Humboldt County, and her herb school. She offered wonderful classes that churned out so many brilliant herbalists that still are in the community. But she did this super cool thing called the Visiting Herbalist series. And every other month she would have somebody come do these weekend intensives. And so I got to study through that with absolutely the who's who of pretty much the herbalist you've ever heard of. They would come because they're friends with Jane and do these and intensives here. So, everybody from Michael Moore to Ryan Drum to, pick your person that came. So that was super important and powerful with it all. And just being able to finally go, you know what? I am an herbalist, but the people would come back in the day and, still, now you can get whole advanced degrees, right? And in herbalism, but we were all still, any new book that came out, the internet was a game changer, obviously, when that happened in terms of access to information. But community would come in, and if it was something that we didn't know, then we would learn it together. We would get the books out, we would look at the plants, it would be like we would smell the plants and just kind of work together to come up with a tea or a formula, and trial and error. And that, that process I learned so much, so much more than, I still take classes and still go to any herb thing I can get because I just love, there's always so much to learn about this field that we're in. But um, yeah, and the women, I have an amazing staff of herbalists that work with me, and we've all been working. A lot of us have been working together for over 20 years together.
Wow.
27 years with the business, but it's so, yeah, it's a tight family there, and we learn so much from each other. Still learn from the community when things walk through the door, but for years now, our sweet Humboldt, we get voted the best holistic healthcare provider on the North Coast. And
Mhm.
so we're really like kind of a primary care service for the community, which is unusual and brilliant. And because we've been here so long, we get to work with a allopathic community. There's docs that send people over, certainly a lot of nurses and nurse practitioners that we can collaborate with in the care of our community. So yeah, I wish I could say, oh, I always knew I wanted to be an herbalist, but that's not how it went for me. The plants just need to work, and yeah, I've certainly never looked back. But all that college stuff played a role. People are like, how did studying literature or poetry, how does that even relate? It's like, because that's a study of the human condition, and that's what we're doing here too, is we are still studying the human condition, only now it's a bridge between the plants and the humans, and
Mm.
that capacity. But yeah.
No, I love that, Julie. I would say I'm a really big fan of Mary Oliver, and she makes me a better person and a better herbalist. So,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Right. Those words just go, they're medicine as well.
Mm-hmm.
They are medicine in this, I think, a lot of times the same way, and how I envision how plants do what they do with us and for us. And yeah. So yeah. Yeah. So
Well, there's a couple things I want to circle back on, Julie. I loved so much of what you shared. So I just want to reiterate some of it. First is just a totally random thing. I will not go into it, but I do have a connection with Alabama, and I just feel like it's important to say Roll Tide, because
wow.
that is a big thing in our household that I don't really talk about, but I know way more about SEC football than I think it's really necessary. But anyway, so I have to say that.
Yes.
I didn't know that your roots were in Alabama, so that was really good to know.
Yeah.
And you said that, like you didn't know that the plants were going to capture you, as when you were younger or whatever. But the thing that strikes me about your story, and I've heard this before in other herbalist stories, I feel it in my own life too, it's that the whisper started and you were enchanted.
Completely.
It's almost like a spell was cast. You were like enchanted, and like you
Yes.
like knew you were drawn to it, and something just like was like, whoo, and it took, then it takes a couple of times. You had the books, you had, Jim Duke, which has a really cool origin story as well. And yeah, what an amazing person, somebody who was so scientific minded, but then that was his response, and because that is even like an open doorway into just like, oh, it's cool, but you don't even know how cool. Like, yeah.
And maybe never know how cool, really.
Really, truly. Yeah, I hope I never do, because I get to be amazed all the time.
Me too.
And then I definitely want to talk about Humboldt, because it has a special place in my heart as well. Humboldt Herbals. But one thing that just struck me about your origin story of creating that one is just like, I love to hear the origin stories and how it's like, well, I just had this crazy idea, and I, went to all this trouble to create this catalog, and, then the work that went into that catalog, and just all of those pieces coming together, and how you didn't know 27 years later you'd be, where you're at today. You just had this idea and you went for it. But something that I really deeply appreciate is that you gave a lot of gratitude to the community and to the people who showed up. And it's this wonderful thing, like the plants enchanted you, you answered, you were called to create this wild, crazy idea of a thing, but it all grew together with the help of the community. And I think that's something that's just so important and has just been coming up for me a lot lately, is how the community, like herbalism, grows through community.
Absolutely. That was always the driving force, was creating access, right? Just
Mm,
creating access. And then, realizing the abundance of medicine that was being crafted here and
mm,
creating access to the community, for that, because I knew they wanted it, and I
mm,
knew they needed it. And just to try to make that as easy as possible to make this connection with the plants and the people. The people have always wanted the plants,
mm,
and
mhm.
just not, it's so short a time, this amnesia of this relationship with plants. It's, just barely removed, and so it's pretty easy to navigate your way back into that. I mean, I am still astonished though by, I was 30 years old when I started Humboldt Herbals, and that was in 1998. And people knew about plant medicine. And I live in a community where it's a thing in Humboldt. This is my mom always goes, "No, I know where all the old hippies went to die," but it's always been a kind of a back to the land, uh, you know, in some ways utopia-ish community story here. So plants were part of it, but how much they are part of mainstream, if you want to call it that now, and how rapidly that shift happened from when I first started to where it is now in terms of, just everybody's consciousness of, this awareness that of working with plants to help your body, you know, do what our bodies do. That shift has been like seismic, it feels like. Um, I don't know,
Yeah, yeah,
it,
I love to hear that too. Just I think it's a good thing to presence that,
yeah.
because it's for somebody who became interested in herbs a year ago or even 5 years ago, it is just a very different world than it was 20 years ago even.
Yes, 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 yes.
So I've had the joy of going to Humboldt Herbals, and I am so grateful that I had this opportunity because you're off the beaten path, so to speak. And so how it happened, I went to school in Santa Cruz, California, with the Tierras at East West, and I have a good friend in Eureka. And so I decided that was the perfect opportunity to rent a car and drive up the coast and the famous 101 and
Mhm.
like just see all the beauty and go visit my friend. And at the time, I didn't know anything about Humboldt Herbals or anything. I was just going to see my friend. And it was kind of a like I'm very like young herbalist, kind of thing. I'm still in school and everything. And so I go visit my friend and she of course is like, "Oh, you have to go to Humboldt Herbals." And so we go there and oh my gosh, I remember just I looked at every single item in the store. It was just like so much fun. It was just such a cool store. Like you said, it's on the corner. It's just very bright and the people are so friendly. And I wanna say actually you had a poster of mine on the wall, which, like, blew my mind. Like, I remember just being like, "Wait, what?" Like, that was,
We've had several of your things on the wall there because
I
there's
think
great
early
tea.
on, it must have been that, like, green one. Do you remember the green one?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it must have
So
been.
it was
Good.
one of the earliest projects that John Gallagher and I collaborated on. So we both came up with this idea and John produced it. And so yeah, I just couldn't believe that you had my poster on the wall, which, like thanks for
That's
supporting the community.
It was such a
And
great tool for the community. You could just go to that, and it was so clear. It was such a magnificent visual aid to explain to people and help them make those connections with their medicines.
yeah, that those
Well,
posters
so
don't
thank
really
you.
exist anymore, but I'll put one on the screen if people are
Yeah,
watching on YouTube.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I loved Humboldt Herbal so much. I remember meeting you. You were so friendly, so welcoming, just to me as being this like bright-eyed, baby herbalist. And yeah, it was just all of it was so exciting. And then I was telling you earlier too, there's this really cool used bookshop right around the corner, and there was a big botanical exposition of books there that was put on by Amy Stewart, who wrote things like The Drunken Botanist and the Poison Plants and everything. And oh my gosh, I was like, Eureka is a heaven like for herbalists. Like it's just like it was so magical, and I just feel like it's always just had this like very magical place in my heart. And it was just so lovely to meet you so early on. And yeah, definitely I encourage everybody go travel and go to the herb shops. It's
Oh,
go
the best.
experience them because it's just they all have their own unique feel, and it's just such a wonderful thing to get a sense of the herbal community. And there's it's really fun like you said, like you have all these community created products that you aren't going to find available outside of that, so that's also really wonderful.
Yeah, that's absolutely, anytime I travel, I search out the herb shops wherever I
Mhm.
go, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, the same. They feel like home, and they're always so fascinating, and you find such cool stuff in every one of them, you know?
Mhm.
"Whoa, look at this, look at this." Yeah, yeah.
Well, the other thing that I loved about being in Eureka, of course, was the redwoods, and going to hike amongst those giants was just unreal. Like, I mean, I just you don't understand it until you've walked it. And I remember also even the small plants. I saw wild ginger there for the first time. It was in bloom
Yeah.
while we were
Mhm.
there. So yeah, there's just so many lovely, lovely things and beings to appreciate while we were there. Yeah, I'm so glad that you chose redwood to speak about today. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Wild ginger's in my logo of the shop. That's
Mm,
how much I also love that plant, and yeah, that was one of my first in this ecosystem here, and I still, am, thrilled every single time I see a wild ginger flower and
mm,
come off that plant. But yeah, the redwood forest, there is no other place on the whole planet like the redwood forest. And so to understand the medicine of redwoods, I think it's worth taking a minute to just talk about that
yeah.
a little bit. So, including the fact that 25 million years ago, nobody knows exactly like what million year the redwoods first appeared, but they do know they've been here for at least 25 million years. And at that time, redwoods covered the entire northern hemisphere. So this whole, part that we're all on now, certainly all the America and even into Russia and some parts of Japan and China,
Wow.
all this enormous redwood forest, so I love to think about, when the dinosaurs then came and, with the redwoods, because they would have been dwarfed, some of them anyway, by the redwoods because the
Mm,
redwoods are so enormous. So, two super cool things about how redwoods grow that also come into play with their medicine. One is the way they do their roots. So, we've got this tree that, these are the largest living organisms on the planet. They're bigger than blue whales, the largest living organisms on the planet, and they don't do a taproot, like the giant live oaks and stuff. Those trees have this big, taproot that goes down and holds them. But what redwoods do is they make this root mat, and they're not
mm,
super huge at the end of these mats. The redwood roots are like, like this big. I mean, they're like the size of a quarter, by the time they get to the ends, but they send these mats out for at least 100 yards in all directions from them. And then those roots intertwine with the roots of the other redwoods that are there. And so the redwood forest, it's like felting, if you craft, it's like a felted mat of roots. And it's this connection with each other, this community connection that they create that gives them the stability and the strength to like push into this, optimum expression of what a tree is able to do. And the other trippy thing that I was just like, "What?" when I learned about it with redwoods. So, plants pull water up through their roots, right? And push it, up out to the leaves, out. Redwood trees have this ability to drink the sky. They can send water down to the roots. They can do that in reverse. So they do both.
hmm.
They transpire a typical, like, typical giant redwood's gonna expire hundreds of gallons of water a day. So they create their own ecosystem in that way. Redwoods love fog and they love moisture, and, we're this temperate rainforest climate here, where they grow. And so there's just this like wild connection with the water cycle to me, and how they work and navigate water in that way, but that they can send water down just blows my mind. It's like I really don't know of another plant that does that besides redwood trees.
Mm.
So that drinking the sky is how I always, think of that. But there's just this like gorgeous balance in that in my mind, of just envisioning this process for them and this like ultimate kind of balancing that they do that again lets them be this pushing the limits of what's possible kind of a being. So redwoods, they're still considered that they're out of their youthful age when they're about 800 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's when they have reached usually their maximum height, which is like a 30-story building is the equivalent of how tall redwoods
Mhm.
are for people who maybe have never seen them. So you can't even possibly see the tops of these trees. And they figure now that the oldest living ones that are still here are somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. So
Wow.
there's one that I have a very special relationship with that I go and visit often that, knows all my secrets and
Mm.
has, held a lot of my tears and things through the years. I call her grandma, but she would be in that close to 3,000 year range. And so it's like, that's like the age of the Parthenon and stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
talk about a long story. And
Yeah.
when you're in the forest, you do feel, there is this kind of fairy tale like quality to it because the immensity of it just defies what your mind can grasp. It really does. And I don't care how many times you go. I've lived here for 30 years now, and I still, every single time I go into the old growth forest, have that same feeling
Mm.
of it's just such a different, there's a different quality of time in a redwood forest to be among that many beings that are that old and that
Mm.
have held that space for that long and have watched the story change, in our little drama traumas. And, I think of them, witnessing, roads and cars and, I mean, through just thousands of years of our little, evolution. I hope we're still evolving, but just like the stories that they know and the space they hold and what they see, all of that's part of the redwood medicine for sure. There's a cool book, just as an aside, if people are interested in kind of really taking a little virtual trip into a redwood forest. It's a nonfiction book, but it reads like a thriller. It's called The Wild Trees by Richard Preston. And he was a journalist, is a journalist, but he was following the work. There's a professor at our local university, which is now Cal Poly Humboldt. It used to be Humboldt State. It just recently, last year, changed to Cal Poly. But Stephen Sillett, and he's a botanist and his wife is a lichenologist. I didn't even know that was like a thing, but that's what she does. And so together they created this way to go up into the redwood canopy, a climbing system that is this whole like, it's ropes and pulleys, through this like really interesting assembly system. Because the way before that people climbed was with tree spikes
Right.
on the sides of boots, kick, kick, kick. And he's like, no, 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 no. So he came up with this really cool rope and pulley system so that people could go up into the canopy. And he's a specialist in that. And nobody had ever been up in the redwood canopy because it's 30 stories high, to get
Mhm.
up part. And so up in the there's a whole ecosystem in the canopies that only exist in redwood canopies. I'm talking whole species of things that only exist like
Wow.
in the nooks way up high, salamanders, worms. There's, that all their whole life live in the redwood canopy. And,
Hmm.
no one even knew they existed. And there's like this whole old growth on top of the redwoods, bonsai. I mean, we say bonsai, but they're still pretty darn big.
Hmm.
Old growth trees on top of old growth. So there's old growth forest of like hemlocks and California bay and Doug fir that are up in the canopies, growing in these crooks of these redwoods, that will be like, 6 foot tall. That's considered bonsai. up in. So there's just this whole other thing of redwoods that we're just now still learning. But the wild trees will just take you right into the forest. He's such a gorgeous writer, and you'll learn so much about woods through that. But so the redwood medicine, it kind of surprised me that people here where the redwoods are, that redwood medicine isn't really something that you find. So that was interesting to me from the get-go. It's like, nobody really is doing much with that. And part of that, I think, is the indigenous nations that are here, of which there are many that all intersect, all have very deep relationships with the redwoods. But the redwoods were the place. It's kind of like one of those emergent story places. That was a place of origin, and it was a place that you went to for peace, and a place you went to learn and to be still and to receive. But it wasn't a place where you went and you took. You didn't go. You didn't harvest from the redwoods. And so we do know now about different properties of the medicine. I know a few people who make medicine from the inner bark with redwood, not many. And it's super high in tannins. So it's got those properties of any of those high tannin plants. It's going to be all the antis, the antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory and anti. It's going to do those things, but we have so many other plants that offer that medicine. The outer bark of redwood, just because it's another interesting thing about redwood, can be up to a foot thick, the outer, and it's really super shaggy, like, it has all this really interesting texture to it. Like it looks furry sometimes almost. It's just this really shaggy, soft, like you can like put your hands on it and push into it. And like there's really a lot of give, in this outer bark of redwoods. So that when it sheds has definitely been used through time as like mattress padding or, things that needed some extra, filling or padding has been worked with in that way. But so the inner bark, super high in tannins. Redwoods are extremely resistant to termites and pests, fire. They're very fire resistant. They have very little oil in them. It's super rare, for example, to find redwood sap. That's just like, when you find it, if you ever do find it, it's going to be the tiniest little
interesting
bit of it, and it's it's gold when you if you're ever gifted that. Nobody, it's like a talent, it's like this gift of that. But which is also why they are still here, thousands of years later. They're very, very fire resistant. I learned from one of the forest botanists that the only thing that can kill a redwood is a lightning strike, a direct lightning strike that hits just in the way that goes into the heartwood. And from that, but even then, redwoods will still sprout. These ancient stumps that you'll come across in some of the forests that are second growth now that have been logged, of these, just enormous proportions, like bigger around than the house that I'm in right now. These stumps will still have sprouts coming side, which is kind of one of the primary ways that they reproduce. I know some people have camera or will see this, but this was also a thing that tripped me out. I don't know if do you see that?
Yeah.
That's a redwood cone.
Oh.
That's how big they are.
So that's like, would you call that like a half inch maybe?
Half an inch, yeah.
Half inch redwood cone.
Size of a redwood cone. So you would think these trees would have like these enormous, cones as a conifer, but they're the tiniest little cones I've ever seen. The seeds in these little dudes are like the size of a tomato seed. So and they take forever. That you can't germinate it on your own, but even out in the wild, it takes them forever to germinate. So seeds, they can reproduce by seeds, but it's not their primary way of reproducing. They sprout. And, if the main tree dies and sprouts around, you find through the forest lots of, they call them fairy rings, but these circles of that are always so extra, extra, extra magical when you come across. those guys. But back to the medicine part. So what we do work with in this community as medicine with the trees are the needles. And we work with just the spring tips that come out. The plant's really putting a lot of energy, into that new growth. And so that's going to be the most potent part of the plant to work with. You can work with older needles, but you have to use a lot more of them than you do if you're just working with those little spring tips. So they're a nice little source of vitamin C. They have the properties that most conifers, would have and share. So to make a tea with them, which is something that I do recommend often for people, especially in this ecosystem where we live. It is a very wet, damp place. Sometimes I joke that we're all a bunch of mushrooms here because like stay damp and in the forest kind of all the time. But that lends itself to the Humboldt crud, as it's lovingly called here. But there's a lot of respiratory, situations that happen for people. Also, lots of plants that grow in the ecosystem besides redwoods that are very specific for that. But redwood is a lovely remedy for the lungs, as a lot of the conifers are. But if you make that tea, it's got this really elegant little lemony flavor, delicious tea, but it's going to introduce these aromatics into the bloodstream that, then you're going to excrete through your lungs. So it's going to have all that good, decongesting, especially like thick stuck cough stuff. It's good at breaking that apart. It's a little bit of a bronchial dilator. So kind of like a nice little light, maybe asthma inhaler. It lets you take that deep breath and clears. Which is also what happens when you walk into the forest. Most forests, but especially a redwood forest, it's completely involuntary. I don't know a single person who doesn't do this. People, when they come to visit, we take them to the forest. If you've been there 8 billion times, you go in the forest and you can't help but take these deep breaths in and this, and everybody does this thing in the forest. And that's still that same medicine working its way, offering that breath, creating that space in ourselves, which will bring me with the needles. I do enjoy a tea. I like to sometimes make an infused vinegar with them. I like to use that redwood tea sometimes as a liquid for rice, to cook rice in. Those aromatics, or maybe a light clear broth sometimes, like with a chicken broth, just a clear kind of a consommé broth, little bit of redwood tea mixed with that, especially for someone who's on the mend, as we'd say in the South, on the mend, and just to take somebody broth. That's a lovely way to work with it. People also make delicious liqueurs and things like that. Just as a fun bit. But mostly I like to work with redwood with the energetic properties in that way. I do at the shop have a redwood honey,
I remember the redwood honey. Yes, that was very lovely.
And redwood honey, it's delightful. And a redwood elixir that's, really almost more like a flower essence. It's not a flower essence. It is an actual infusion of the tips, but it's worked with in a drop dose, like essences are. And what I found with that, and it still goes back to this lung, but I'm sure you've learned that too from different herb teachers, but that the lungs will hang on to grief. That's a place where grief goes to hide out until we're ready to maybe do something with it, if we ever are. But when we don't, process that grief, then the lungs are a place that'll hang on to that energy of that forest. So we move on seemingly about our day, but there's this old grief that's in there. And redwood, especially in that drop dose, the tea will help with this too if you work with it with intention, and even just being in the forest. But that spaciousness it creates, it lets you very gently but very effectively release that old stagnant grief energy. And what I've come to understand over all these years, what I think that grief energy is that that grief of separation, is that grief of separation from the natural world, because that's a recent situation we've gotten ourselves into. And the more computer, the more technology, the more we're like pulled in. COVID really did a number, of like just pulling us into this kind of trippy, not real zone, because we're curious creatures as humans. And now through these gadgets that we have access to this unimaginable amount of information all the time at any time. So it's this compulsion that's really hard to override,
Mhm.
of wanting to, like look and search. And it's like, ooh, let me go Google that. Let me this. But, we've just separated ourselves so much from the natural world. And that has created an absolute grief in our species and our being. We're not meant to be that. We are co-evolved with this planet, with all of the creatures on this planet. We're the new kids on the block. They all dreamed us into being for a reason. And the reason was not to separate ourselves. It's like, wait, no, hold up. That is not the point. Time out, flag on the play, whatever. It's like, no. And so redwoods remind us how to breathe, right? How to release some of that, create that space again, but also in the energetics of that medicine, or this community that are what allow redwoods to be who and what they are for all of these thousands of years. It's through community support and community connection. And so it reminds us of that when we work with redwood. It reminds us that we also are part of this vast community, and not just the human part of it. We have plant ancestors and tree ancestors, and the waters and the winds and the animals. These are all our community that we interact with every day, whether we're aware of it or not. The plants know you, the plants in your world, the plants on your way to go check your mail, or whatever route it is that you take to work. You go by those plants every day, and they know you. They know if you're cranky, they know what kind of mood you're having, what's up in your life. They're listening, they're watching, they're paying attention. They will actually upregulate and downregulate certain, chemicals that they make in their bodies to be more beneficial, to try to move you into a place of health and vitality, because that's in the best interest of the whole story. We're all working together to have, the best possible outcomes together that we can create. And so it's very much in the interest of all of these other beings we're in co-creative partnership with, to have us be our best.
Mm.
And that is absolutely how I think plant medicine works. Absolutely. Because of our curious minds, it's been interesting to watch the evolution with herbalists, and in our field. And we're just so driven to be the knowers, to be the knower how this plant works and exactly what it's doing, and exactly how it's changing the tissue state, and and all of that is true. And there's this whole huge other part of the medicine that is so much more vast than that, what these ancestors are doing. And as a retail herbalist, it's been kind of a trippy place to be, because you know because on the one hand, if you're going to work with someone with the plants and be that intermediary, then you want to do these really involved intakes, and really get to understand, and have their their blood work and all this information about what's going on in their physical body, and then custom craft a formula. And that's how you do this. And what I have seen in now almost 30 years of doing this work in my community is that turns out, there's a lot of shitty stuff out there in the herbal community too, not in our community, but crap you can go buy at Costco or whatever. There's that level of stuff that's just being churned and cranked out that has very little vitality and life force and medicine left in the plant. But when you're working with, with good quality plant medicine, turns out a lot of those things you can buy off the shelf are extremely effective for a wide range of humans. And that's sometimes we just don't talk about that as retail herbalist, because that's not the way it's done, but it does work. that way. And what we also have found in that is that people's bodies, there's still this intelligence in the body, that, so for example, if someone came in the shop and, is like, I just really want a good tea for stress because my anxiety is through the roof, it's like we've got 10 different teas that could be appropriate for that. So what we do is we'll, kind of pop those out and invite the person to smell them. It's like, these would all, be benefit, but why don't you smell them? And, the one that smells the best to you, and I know this completely as a fact, the one that smells the best to them is going to be the one that is the most beneficial for them.
Yeah, no
And
doubt.
surprise what that might be, but but so back to redwoods, that is the medicine to me. That is this great, incredible gift of the redwoods, is this ability to help with this connection back to community and to create this space so that you can within yourself also begin to remember the limits, to push the ceiling of what it's possible for you to be, where it's possible for you to go. There's all of these insights and inspirations and things that will come from being in the forest or from working with a redwood medicine. And because these trees, once upon a time, were covered the entirety of the northern hemisphere, whatever trees live where you live, if you live in the northern hemisphere, they know the soil, the earth still holds that story of the redwoods in all of those places. So your trees know the story of the redwoods. They know the story of those ancestors as well. And, not to be, well, yeah, it is to be, I hate the woo woo word because that's not, haven't we grown past that now? It just is. It's what it is. That's where we are. And by golly, it's a fact. But you can ask, you can invite, the trees where you are, you can ask them to help you access the medicine of the redwoods, of these ancient, ancient, ancient elders of ours. And your trees know that story and they know how to do that for you. So I just am inviting you to experiment with that with your own trees and just ask them to help connect you with the story of these redwood ancestors and feel that, if you want to make a tea, if you want to just sit with the tree and breathe that in, maybe, conjure in your mind an image of redwoods, although it's really hard to fathom redwoods, to see redwoods. And even when you do, you just go, gosh, are you kidding me? Yeah. So, there's not a day I don't work with redwood in some way. I have a redwood grove in my little backyard, and every day, every morning, that's just one of my out with my teas, and we just go breathe together and have a chat. And in this place, I can still feel this was all old growth, not that long ago. It's been not too many decades that all of this was logged. It's like really the late 1800s is when all that started and went quickly. There's only 3% of the old growth redwood forest left now. It was fast and furious, but there is very much, even, you can kind of close your eyes around here, anywhere in Humboldt County, in the city, even where my shop is, I can still feel the old growth forest, that would have been where my shop is now. I can feel that energy coming up through the shop. And it's, I love to hold that imagery when I'm walking around and doing my stuff, when I'm at the co-op, picking out my lettuce, it's like, wow, this is like, I still feel this ancient old growth forest here. And have that presence of the community and the people that it has drawn to Humboldt County. Humboldt County is a trippy place, y'all. Really, come. It's wild. The people here, there's more creatives per capita than, it's like renowned for that. There's so many artists and writers and thinkers and innovators, and it's because of the trees. The trees like call the people here, and if you're called, you just can't imagine ever living anywhere else. I'm a great traveler. I travel all over the world and I love to travel. And I always am so excited to come home and to touch back down. Even just flying into our little regional airport, you fly over, the forest when you're flying in. And even from the air, I swear you can breathe better up in the airplane. You can feel the green and it's like, yes, yes, yes. But yeah.
Well, so much of what you shared, Julie, has just made my heart sing. I don't live in the redwoods, but I do live in a forest, a ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, and I spend hours every day walking in the forest. And I feel like that's some of my most important work as an herbalist.
Yeah.
One, to be walking, and two, to be in conversation with the trees, especially this time of year because we have so much snow on the ground. That's who's out there, are the trees. And I love what you said about that because I feel, I was raised with this kind of false idea of separation between myself and the living world around me. And every day I feel like that is really important work, is to erase that false, idea. And so, and it's taken me time. It's not something that's been instantaneous. There's been huge leaps, in certain times, but it's really getting out there every day and spending time in those communities and just being out there in the elements and everything has been so important to me. So I just want to invite everybody, go out, like Julie said, go out, feel the trees. And I love how you shared that there were redwoods all over North America and how people can tap into that. And but we all have trees everywhere, and we can go experience them and share our stories and hear theirs in return.
Absolutely. Yeah, they know you. They know you really, really well. They know way more about you than you probably realize. But when that's a fascinating, perspective to me, is just, when I'm out on my walks, holding that awareness that they, all of the beings you're encountering are responding to you every bit as much as you're responding to them, you're changing their story in that moment too. They have a really heightened awareness of you and where you're at. And this, like,
And if anyone doubts that, just go spend time in a place where there's squirrels.
there you go. Exactly. It's totally true. Oh yeah. It's, we are in a co-creative relationship. You're in relationship. In a huge community that supports you and wants you to be the best you can be, because that's in their best interest too. So, it's not totally altruistic. It's like, but that's what we do. That's, any kind of community framework, which I feel like, especially these days, we're maybe being pushed even faster to realize that community is where it's at, and that recognizing and honoring these connections, and the sentience of this incredible planet that we get to pop around on.
Well, I really want to talk about your recipe that you've shared with us. I don't want to forget it. You've shared the Redwood Pots de Crème, and it sounds so lovely. I'm already envisioning how I can do this with Douglas fir needles, which is where
totally, pretty much.
Please tell us about a pot de crème. This is really yummy.
So it is totally yummy. And it kind of, how it is when you're playing with recipes and stuff, right? So, as herbalist, I don't know, I have this idea that all herbalists are like really kind of foodies at heart. Because we just love adding herbs and playing with flavors of our herbs in our food. But, like preceding that is that most of us really love food. It's a really fun sensory pleasure for us in a human body, and a great way to connect with our world and with nature. So adding plants in is always fun to kind of play around and mess around with. But this recipe, when I really started playing around with infusing redwood needles, one of the first things I kind of played around with was infusing young redwood tips into butter, like with other herbs, and making these spreads and stuff. But then, the pot de crème came a little bit later. It was like, if you can do butter, and it was like, ooh, and we were playing around with making different truffles, me and some girlfriends, and infusing different things in cream, to make different truffles. So, we were doing like kava chocolate and what, all these different things. But then it was like, oh, let's do redwood truffles, and infusing the redwood and the cream, which worked really, really well. And then that was like, oh, what would really pop this flavor of the redwood is a little bit of orange. And it was like, ooh, and maybe just a little bit of lemon, because redwood's got those citrus notes to it, and the flavor profile that comes through. So then I was, just of a day, needed to take something to a dinner party. And I just went, I wonder, with just a basic custard, which really is all these are, is a basic custard recipe. But it's like, I bet that's going to be phenomenal. And it was, and it is. And I still all the time. And even here, people are like, it's just like such a showstopper, with whatever tree you've got around. It works with spruce, it works with pine, get those young little tips though, for sure. There's going to be a lot more flavor in those young little new growth tips. But they're easy to make. It's a little bit of time. It's one of these things you want to let it sit overnight. You want to let your cream infuse for a good long while. So you got to plan a couple of days ahead. But once you get them made, I've had them still be perfect even after a week in the fridge. On the recipe, I said a couple of days, but they really will hang out for a while. So you can make them quite ahead of time. And I guarantee you people are going to be wowed by this. It's just so fun to get that flavor from something so unexpected like this. And the flavor totally comes through. There's no mistaking it. It's not kick you in the face, but it's not super subtle either. It's very much there. And so you really feel like you're, kind of eating the forest a bit, It's that way to take it in such a sensory, yummy way. So, the forest is delightful anyway, but, with these bites, it's kind of like going in the forest and everybody goes, with this, everybody's like, oh, and you can't help but, and that, and everybody's just and umming around the table as this forest kind of, intersects with you in that way. And I like to use it as a invite to get people, this back to the dinner party thing, but as you're eating your tree dessert, to ask people to share like stories. It's like, what's like, what's been like an important tree in your life? Because everybody's got one, whether it was a childhood or maybe it's more current times, maybe something when you were traveling, but it's really cool to hear stories from your friends about tree beings that have made an impact, on their life, like a really deep one. They have these really visceral memories of tree times. We all do. So it's a cool little entrance way into that conversation when you're having this yummy dessert. But it's easy. I like to do them in little mason jars. You could do it, in just like a big old presentation too, if you wanted to. But if you do them in the little mason jars, then you can just serve them right in that, and it's a cool presentation, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited to do this with Douglas fir when our tips come out later this year.
So, yeah, well, let me know how it goes. I know it's going to be delicious. Yeah.
Yeah. And for all of our listeners, you can download your beautifully illustrated recipe card at herbswithrosalee.podcast.com or look at the show notes. So thank you so much for sharing that recipe, Julie.
Yeah, thank you to your super talented team for creating such a gorgeous PDF.
Yeah, they are amazing. Tatiana's our artist, and a lot of people go into making it work. So yes, it's lovely.
Yeah. So enjoy, everybody. It's easy. Does take, a little planning ahead, but delicious. You'll love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear what people think.
Me too.
Well, Julie, one thing that we haven't talked about at all, which is, I know something you're very involved with, is the Organization for Nature Evolutionaries. And this is an organization that, as soon as I heard the mission statement and heard what you were all about, it just spoke directly to my heart. And I think it's some of the most important work that's going on today. So I would love to hear about it from you.
Yeah. So for the last 8 years, I have had the great pleasure to serve on the Visioning Council for one, which is what some people might call a board of directors. It's the Visioning Council, and that is absolutely what we do with that. One was founded in 2013 by Pam Montgomery, my dear friend and mentor, and just a woman of my heart. But with the mission, it's an educational nonprofit. You can find us at natureevolutionaries.com. But we are an educational nonprofit devoted to uh, teaching and creating opportunities to experience really deep co-creative partnership with nature. And so we have almost all of our content is free. We do have some amazing paid courses that will facilitate through different ways this very deep connection and co-creative partnership. But almost all of our content is free. We have a rich webinar library that you can, if you want to watch them, you can do that from the website, but they are also available on our Nature Evolutionaries podcast that's on all of your favorite, streaming platforms. You can subscribe to Nature Evolutionaries with true visionaries who are living and embodying this work of co-creative partnership in so many different ways, with oceans, with rivers, with mountains, with plants. It just goes, it's infinite, and still continues to grow, and is so, it's if you ever just need a way to kind of do a quick reset or a quick reconnect, especially in these spinning times, just even at random picking a podcast or something, from our from the webinars, if you want to see the folks, all of them are going to help you shift into remembering where we are, remembering the sentience of our whole planet and the sentience of all the beings on it, and this interconnected web of life that we're all participating in, and how present that is for us all the time. It's just our own separating ourselves from it. It never goes anywhere. So just those little prompts to reconnect and remember and be plugged in that way changes everything. It changes, it will change your whole day and it will change how you're going about what you're doing from day to day, and the awareness that you hold with that. We have a lot of every year on the equinoxes, we do free, they're global ceremonies. We do have people that participate from all over the world. There will be a different theme. Those are excellent to engage with. There'll be a short little film on our website that explains and gives you some really gorgeous imagery to work with. We have free little downloadable PDFs that will have some prompts for the ceremony, but these are things you can go and do, wherever you are. If you're in the city, if you have land, doesn't matter. You can participate and work with these global gratitude ceremonies. Our next one coming up is going to be this spring equinox. They're available perpetually online though, but we'll be doing a forest gratitude ceremony. And we do these, this is kind of a newer thing in our podcast world, but these focused topic ideas that we can really do a deep dive and really get juicy and explore and learn from all sorts of different voices who have information to contribute in a more involved kind of series of podcasts. So our last one that we did was around wetlands, and that's all available online. Really gorgeous information about the space and place of wetlands and the knowledge that they hold, and the beings that interact with wetlands. But the next one that's coming up is going to be, it'll run through June, maybe even into July, but it's a forest appreciation series. And we have just phenomenal speakers who are going to be talking about all kinds of different aspects of their forest work. We have Luke Connor, who's an ethnobotanist from the East Coast, and he has this super cool, it's called Astounding Earth is what he calls it, but he offers these like really immersive experiences in ecology, so you can go, he's got online content too, but he just does these super cool workshops with people, and his understanding of forest, he's studied forest his whole life. Rocio Alarcon is going to be speaking about the Ecuadorian, the Amazon forest that is her beloved homeland, and her vast knowledge and work with the indigenous cultures there in helping to, preserve what's left in the Amazon and stop the extractive processes and stuff there. We have a Yurok elder here who is a fire lighter, which if you don't know what that is just fascinating to learn about in and of itself. But they are the people who manage forest ecology through fire. So there's, we have firefighters, which sometimes you need, but you also need the fire lighters for forest health. And she'll be speaking to that knowledge, which is really, really fascinating. Diana Bears Kroger is going to be part of the series. She's got many, many books and just such a wise elder in forest health and just how deeply we are connected with forest, and that we really wouldn't be able to exist if it weren't for the forest for so many reasons, oxygen being not the least of them. But just yeah, we're just so co-evolved with the florist, with the forest. And, she's always exciting and brilliant, and more people are coming in. So that will be the next series. After that, we're going to be doing a deep series on oceans. So that's fall of this year. It'll be the same kind of, we'll just have speakers from all different walks and different voices, helping us understand the oceans and our relationship and, ancestry with oceans as partners in this life on this planet. So one is just a magnificent organization. And yeah, check out the website. We also do these free every Sunday. We call them Earth Rights, WRITES. But you get a little email in your inbox every Sunday that's just going to have an inspirational quote and a really gorgeous image, and it's a nice thing to get in your email. So, yeah, you can just sign up. You can get all that stuff free. You can, of course, become a member, which we would love your support in that way. But yeah, check it out. It's wonderful.
I'm personally so excited for the forests because as someone who lives in the forest, named after the forest, obviously deep connection there. And then I often say if I didn't live in the forest, I would live near the ocean. So excited for both of these topics.
Yeah, they're going to be great, both of them.
Yeah.
Super.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about one. I love the organization so much. I've been honored to partner with you a couple times in podcast and webinar. So it's been lovely. And I love the work that you all are doing over there. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Rosalee. We sure appreciate you and your help and support with what we're all about. Yeah.
And before you go, I have one last question for you. Yes. And that question is, how do herbs instill hope in you, Julie?
Yeah, so they do in these ways that we've been, kind of talking about throughout the conversation. What I see happen when people begin to work with plant medicine, when people begin to work with herbs, and again, I really think this is the deep medicine of what the plants are doing. I think when we take the plants into our bodies, and we hear the stories of those plants, that really what the medicine is it's reminding us on a cellular, on a genetic level. It is reminding our tissues and our bodies how to express that vibrant, innate health that is in there, instead of treating a symptom, treating a condition. That's kind of what the language framing is, because that's what our medical, it's following from a medical kind of language transition. There's a symptom and you treat it. There's a symptom and you treat it. And those things are true. But I think what's really happening is that, yes, the symptoms resolve because there's this remembering of how to be vibrant and how to be healthy, and that's what the plants are offering. And so that gives me tremendous hope, because it's not just the physicality, it's on all the levels. It's emotionally, it's spiritually, it's energetically. It reminds us how to work with our heart fields, and how to be present from that place of the heart. These are gifts of the plants. And I just, it's like, oh, could you imagine if we were all coming from that place? I can't imagine that. I can hold that vision and imagine that. It's just right there. That, I think, really is who we are as a species. And I think plants and herbs are what are going to take us there. We all have a relationship with plants as humans, whether there's an awareness of it or not. Your house is probably made from plants. You eat plants. They're your nutrition. You're probably wearing plants in some way. I mean, there's like no part of our life that's not, we breathe plants. It's impossible to be separate from plants. And so just this, holding that awareness of that there's this level, because it does help. It helps if we hold that awareness and if we offer that story to other people. It takes it much deeper and it takes it much wider. The story becomes much, 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 much bigger from that place, and the healing that can be, stimulated from that is vast. It's just vast. And so herbs are what's going to take us there. Herbs are going to get us through this next level, to this next phase of our evolution as a species. It's going to be the plants. It's always been the plants, and it will be the plants again that take us. They always are a step or 10 ahead in the story. And yeah. So, and this like boom in the herbal industry, to me, that's part of that. That's part of that happening. That's part of the plants, really being able to reach out and connect, even if the language we're using right now maybe isn't quite there. So many people are working with plants now. So many are excited by this and are searching for this and want information and knowledge on this. People just are hungry for this plant connection and this plant information. So I love that there's so many opportunities for that to happen for people. There's so many herb schools now, and so, herb stores and books, and they just keep coming and coming. And I think every voice in that is so essential. And, more voices are still, bubbling, waiting to come. And I can't wait to hear those voices too. But yeah, I am thrilled at where we are in our relationship with plants, and thrilled for where I see that it's going to go.
So beautifully shared, Julie. I feel like as a younger herbalist, I was initially just so enamored with just this simple idea of plants treating symptoms, and just being able to take ginger candy when my tummy was upset and have
Yeah.
that get better was just like, it honestly did blow my mind. And it still does.
You're still-
I'm never over it.
No.
And I still love that, just kind of like, I have this issue and here's this plant. And I
Yeah.
love the romance of it. When I look into my tea sometimes, and I'm like, I'm drinking bark as medicine. I love it. I love it. But I
Yeah.
will say, what like really has gotten like into my soul, into my heart, and which is what motivates me, is what you have just beautifully shared. So it's not that I'm over the, like you said, it's
No.
all important. And it's like this next step of just like, oh, that's what plants do. So
Yeah.
you just shared it so beautifully. I couldn't do it any better.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah. It just, yeah. And I too love looking in my teacup, and I love, still making potions is, I mean, there's nothing more exciting
Yeah.
than, blending and creating and having that, yeah, I still, man, yeah, it lights my fire still, that. And I just, when, yeah, even in the shop, we'll just offer, even just offering a story, when you're taking your tea or your herb, if you haven't actually seen that plant grow, maybe, not that I want you to hang out on your computer, but Google it. Look at the plant. Look at where it grows and how it grows and what's its shape and what's its color. What sense do you get from its life force? Because that's what you're taking in, and to kind of reconnect that this is a living, sentient being that you have just invited into yourself. Who is it? Go find out. Look at him. Learn a little bit. It's really cool. And then what you're seeing in your cup, just like, it's like, it's bark, and it's the bark of this being.
Mhm.
Like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah. Yeah.
I love seeing your enthusiasm, Julie. I feel it. It's so good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Julie. It's been a long time coming. It's been so lovely to have you here. So great to connect with you again. I hope we connect in real life soon. Hopefully at Humboldt Herbals. I would love to walk into that store again. Special place
Oh,
in my heart.
that would be such a treat. Please come anytime.
Well, thank you. And thanks again for being on the show, Julie.
Thank you for having me, Rosalee. Truly a pleasure.
Thanks for being here. Don't forget to head over to the show notes at herbswithrosaleepodcast.com to download your beautifully illustrated recipe card. There, you'll also be able to sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is the best way to stay in touch with me. You can find more about Julie and Humboldt Herbals on social media and their website, humboldtherbals.com. If you'd like more herbal episodes to come your way, then one of the best ways to support this podcast is by subscribing on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. I deeply believe that this world needs more herbalists and plant-centered folks, and I'm so glad that you're here as part of this herbal community. Also, a big round of thanks to the people all over the world who make this podcast happen week to week. Emily Thomas Anderson is the project manager who oversees the entire podcast operation, from guest outreach to writing show notes and on and on. I often tell people, I just show up. Emily does most of the heavy lifting. Nicole Paul is the operator for the entire Herbs with Rosalee school and community. She keeps an eagle eye view on everything to ensure it's running smoothly. Francesca is our fabulous video and audio editor. She not only makes listening more pleasant, she also adds beauty to the YouTube videos with plant images and video overlays. Tatiana Rusakova is the botanical illustrator who creates gorgeous plant and recipe illustrations for us. I love them, and I know you love them. Once the illustration is ready, Jenny creates the recipe cards as well as the thumbnail images for YouTube. Alex is our behind-the-scenes tech support and social media manager, and Karen and Emily are our student services coordinators and community support. If you've written in with a question, undoubtedly you got help from them. For those of you who like to read along, Jennifer is who creates the transcripts each week. Xavier, my handsome French husband, is the cameraman and website IT guy. It takes an herbal village to make it all happen, including you. Thank you so much for your support through your comments, reviews, and ratings. One of my favorite things about this podcast is hearing from you. I read every comment that comes in, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on the redwoods. Okay, you've done it. You've lasted to the very end of the show, which means you get a gold star and this herbal tidbit. While it's easy to get lost in the grandeur of the towering redwoods, there's an entire world of life thriving beneath their canopy. The redwood forest isn't just about the trees, it's this lush, layered ecosystem teeming with plants and fungi and creatures that create a world all their own. When I was there, I was enamored with the shy, hidden flowers of wild ginger peeking out from the forest floor, the wide variety of ferns from delicate maidenhairs to towering sword ferns. They painted the understory with this vibrant green. There were trillium blooms, elegant and fleeting. They stood like quiet sentinels among the shaded paths. And then there was salal with its leathery leaves. I love their flowers so much. And then later the dark berries would provide food for both wildlife and traditional foragers. And of course, no redwood walk would be complete without spotting banana slugs, nature's slow-moving recyclers, gliding through the damp, mossy ground. This incredible tapestry of life makes the redwood forest feel like a world within a world, full of medicinal plants, edible treasures, and quiet wonders waiting to be noticed. Thank you, as always, for joining me on this herbal adventure. I'll see you next time.